So now we are going to the inside of the eye. The eye is hollow and it has a layered wall and fluid-filled anterior and posterior cavities. These layers are called tunics. The outermost layer is the fibrous layer and it is the whites of your eye. The whites of your eye is called the sclera, and the sclera comes around to the anterior part of the eye to form the transparent cornea. The middle layer is the vascular layer, and that consists of the iris, which is the colored part of your eye, the choroid, and the ciliary body. The ciliary body is this blue structure here that will hold the lens in place. And the innermost layer is the retina, which contains the photoreceptors for vision. So again, the sclera and cornea are part of the fibrous outermost layer. The function of this layer is to support and protect the eye, and our eye muscles that move the eyes up and down and left and right are attached here on the sclera. The cornea itself is the first structure that bends light. It is curved, and the bending of light is called refraction. The vascular layer is the middle layer. It's vascular, so that's where the blood vessels are, and as well as the lymphatic vessels and intrinsic muscles of the eye. The intrinsic muscles of the eye are those that open and decrease the size of the pupil. The vascular layer includes the iris, the ciliary body, and the choroid. The functions of this layer are to provide blood vessels and lymphatics to eye tissue, to regulate the amount of light entering the eye, to secrete and absorb aqueous humor, which is a fluid circulating in the eye chambers, and to control the shape of the lens. The ciliary body does this. The lens changes shape because this is essential for focusing. The iris is the colored part of the eye. In it are blood vessels and pigment cells and 2 layers of smooth muscle. The ciliary body is a thickened region that bulges into the interior of the eye, and it's a ring of fibers that connects to the lens to allow the lens to change shape as we focus. The choroid is the vascular layer, and it's got a very extensive capillary network to supply oxygen and nutrients to the innermost layer, the retina, which is the neural layer. The inner layer, or the retina, is thick. The outer pigmented layer absorbs light. This will keep light in the eye, and then the thick inner neural layer contains the photoreceptors, and these photoreceptors are sensitive to light. There are eye cavities separated by the lens. There is an anterior cavity that goes from the cornea to the lens, and this contains aqueous humor. There are 2 chambers, so the cavity is subdivided into chambers: an anterior chamber, which is the cornea to the iris, and a posterior chamber, which is the iris to the ciliary body. The posterior cavity, so the cavity is the bigger subdivision, is filled with gelatinous vitreous humor. This cavity is big, and the 2 chambers up front here are small. The anterior cavity contains the ciliary body. This has a muscle that is smooth muscle, and it has these tiny little ligaments. You can see these little ligaments called suspensory ligaments that go from the ciliary muscle to the lens, all the way around the lens. And this allows the lens to change shape as we focus on near and far objects. The aqueous humor is the fluid that circulates in this anterior chamber and posterior chamber. It passes through the pupil. The pupil is not a structure, it is just an opening. The functions of this fluid are to transport nutrients and wastes, form a fluid cushion, help retain the eye shape, and stabilize the position of the retina. The iris is pigmented, very vascular. Our eye color is determined by our genes that influence the amount of melanocytes and density of the pigment. So we're going to be looking at what's called the visual axis, and the visual axis is the pathway that an object, that the light flows from an object to land on the retina. So the very first structure that refracts or bends the light will be the cornea. It's transparent and clear, and it is made of collagen. It's avascular. It receives oxygen and nutrients from tears. Just posterior to the cornea is the lens. It's anchored in place by the suspensory ligaments of the ciliary body, and the primary function of the lens is to change shape, to allow the focus of an image right on the photoreceptors. The choroid is the middle layer. Blood vessels nourish all eye structures. The sclera, the whites of the eye, is the dense fibrous outer tissue. And the optic nerve, which is Roman numeral number 2, conveys visual information to the brain. The ciliary body supports the lens, and the retina contains photoreceptors, pigment cells, supporting cells, and neurons. The pupil is the opening in the iris through which light passes, and there are two muscles here that regulate the amount of light. There is a dilator muscle that will enlarge the pupil, and there is a sphincter pupillae muscle that will decrease the size of the pupil. Here's that visual axis. So we have an object out here, and the visual axis is an imaginary line drawn from that object to where it lands on the retina. So all of these structures that light must pass through in order to get to the retina. So the retina contains the photoreceptors, pigment cells, supporting cells, and neurons. The photoreceptors are on the inner neural portion. And in the back of the eye, there's a patch of the retina with a lot of photoreceptors. It's called the macula. And the very center of that macula is called the fovea centralis. And it's got the highest concentration for the sharpest vision there. You may have heard of macular degeneration. It would be degeneration of the photoreceptors in that area. So you want to review the structures of the eye, and let's look at what the structures are in order that light passes through before the image is shown on the retina. First, the cornea, then the anterior chamber, and which actually has fluid in it, the aqueous humor, and the posterior chamber. It is going to pass through the opening of the iris, so it passes the iris, and that opening is called the pupil. It passes the lens, and then it lands on the retina. So when you focus on an object, it will produce a very sharp image on the retina. Focusing process is a two-step process. When light is bent or refracted, it passes from air. Light is bent or refracted as it passes from air into the cornea. So that amount of bending will always stay the same because the cornea doesn't change. But then the light is refracted even further as it passes through the lens. And then we can adjust that lens so that the light rays bend toward the focal point, that very specific point on the retina with the sharpest vision. So the focal distance of a lens is the distance between the center of the lens and its focal point. And it's determined by the shape of the lens and the distance from the object to the lens. Now, the distance from the lens to the retina can't change. So we change the lens to accommodate for different distances. So in this picture here, you can see that the object is close, so it must bend at a greater angle. And here the object is far away, and the lens is more rounded, and there is less of an angle of bend. So accommodation is the change in the lens shape to keep the focal distance constant. Just like with our microscopes, the image lands on our retina upside down and reversed, and our brain will compensate for that. They did a study of, I think they were probably college freshmen, where they paid them to enter the study, and they were given these special goggles that turned everything upside down. Well, within 3 days, their brain compensated for that, and they saw everything right side up again. But once they took the goggles off the people, now the whole world was upside down. So it took another 3 days for their brain to compensate and show everything right side up again. The near point of vision is how far an object, how close an object can get to your eyes but still remain in focus. So you can determine your near point by having a ruler, holding a pencil out in front of you and focusing on the tip of it and making sure it's in focus, bringing that pencil closer and closer to your eye. When it is no longer in focus, that tip of it, that is your focal point. And as we age, that focal point becomes further and further away because the lens becomes less elastic. The neural layers of the retina contains layers of the photoreceptors, neurons, and supporting cells. So the pigmented layer, so look here at this pigmented layer. So we're on the outer surface of that. So it's the more superficial layer of the eye, that brown layer there. That is the pigmented layer, and that absorbs light to prevent light from bouncing around within the eye. The neural layer is the photoreceptors and the supporting cells and the neurons. And these photoreceptors are close to that pigmented layer. And then deep to that, the innermost layer will be the ganglion cells. And those ganglion cells, the axons of those cells will converge. So you can see these axons here converging here at the optic disc to form the optic nerve. This region right here of the optic disc, there are no photoreceptors there. So this area is our blind spot. And here's the blind spot. That's where the optic nerve enters the eye. Here is the macula, the region of densest concentration of photoreceptors, so you'll get your clearest vision. And then the fovea centralis is the dark region right in the center, your area of absolutely the sharpest vision. You can also see the central retinal artery and vein emerging from the center of the optic disc. Photoreceptors of the retina are the rods and cones. Rods are very, very sensitive. They allow us to see in very, very dim light. But if you notice that going out at night when the light is very dark and you're just barely getting adapted to it, and you can see that you cannot see